if you're clearing out an entire people based on their ethnicity from where they live, that to me is a form of genocide.
The Israelis, including the highest levels of the Israeli government, they just speak out of both sides of their mouth the whole time. And so it's like, which argument are we even taking on?
The disgusting situation that we are now left with, the fact that people like the two of you will continue to put out this false information to perpetuate this conflict.
I didn't think anyone could be more disingenuous than the UK ambassador. I gotta say, Natasha, you've got right up there. You've crossed that. The United States pulled its aid and suspended its arms sales. Israel's war on Hamas would end very quickly. That's one of the reasons why debates matter. A collapse in public support is usually a big part of how wars come to an end. American voters used to be steadfast in their support for Israel, but that support is now fading quickly. There's a growing consensus that Israel's war in Gaza is, to quote former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, indiscriminate, unrestrained, brutal and criminal. The UK, France and Canada, all allies of Israel, now say it's intolerable, unacceptable and wholly disproportionate. Debate has moved a long way beyond Israel's right to defend itself and is increasingly centred on whether it's committing war crimes and whether the United States should wield its influence and power to make it stop. And in the court of public opinion, this is much about morality and humanity as it is about legal expertise. Well, my next two guests have been hugely influential advocates for either side. Dave Smith is a libertarian commentator, a comedian, and the host of the Part of the Problem podcast. Natasha Hausdorff is a barrister, international lawyer, and a passionate supporter of Israel. Let's welcome you both to Uncensored. Dave Smith, I finally lost it really with any attempt to try and defend what Israel was doing, having been a pretty steadfast defender of its right to defend itself from what happened on October the 7th. But when you launch a blockade for 3 months at an already utterly tormented civilian population who are already struggling to eat, and you can see from the scenes that we've seen in the last 48 hours that they are starving people prepared to risk death to get their hands on meager amounts of food. When a government like Israel does that, at the same time as it's simultaneously bombarding those people night after night after night, albeit with the crucial caveat they always put in that they are targeting Hamas solely and that everything around Hamas is collateral damage. But to me, this reached a point where it became clearly disproportionate. And that's a view that clearly the UK has reached, the French have reached, many people in America have reached. You certainly haven't come to that thought process in the last few months. You've been saying that for a long time. The question I have for you, what happens though now? We are where we are. Netanyahu and his government are in charge. Nobody seems to be stopping them. What happens?
Well, that is a good question, and I don't know for sure what the answer is. By the way, it's been great to watch your evolution on this topic, Peirs. It's good that you joined us. Later is better than never.
Yeah, to clarify, I would say this: I don't want to join a side. Right? I was in the Middle East last week by chance. A lot of people come up to me going, "Thank you for switching sides," and I said, "I haven't switched sides. I've always tried to be a fair-minded, impartial journalist doing the job a journalist should do, which is challenging everybody." I think I've had more guests on from both sides actually and held more debates than any other show in the world of this kind. So, I do think it's important. I don't want to be seen as taking a side. What I feel now, though, I think it's an important clarification, but what I think is important now is that this has gone too far. And I can see that very clearly.
Yes. Okay. So I didn't mean to box you into a side, just making the point that you have come to the conclusion that what Israel's doing is indefensible. And I thought it was fascinating and shocking watching you grill the Israeli ambassador who simply cannot tell you or even ballpark how many kids they have killed in this whole thing. Yeah, look, I mean, I think what Israel, to your broader question of where does this all end up going, there's almost two kind of simultaneous wars in a sense that are going on. There's the actual, control of power, in which case Israel's done phenomenally well over the last couple years. I mean, Israel still has the support of the most powerful governments in the world, damn near unconditionally, if not purely unconditionally. They've been very successful in terms of taking out Hezbollah leaders. They've been very successful in terms of destroying the Gaza Strip. They've been successful in getting the regime change that they've wanted for many years in Syria. However, simultaneously, while that's going on, global opinion has drastically changed of Israel to a degree that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. And despite whatever arguments might be made for whether this meets a genocide or doesn't meet a genocide, or whether, as two former Israeli prime ministers who have come out recently and said that war crimes are being committed, wherever you fall on that, the fact is that the debate is now over whether Israel is committing a genocide or not. And that is something that all of us should take a step back and appreciate how profound it is. Especially amongst young people, in the future, I don't believe Israel will ever be viewed the same as it was by my parents' generation. And so what does that mean? As you mentioned earlier, Peirs, that's right. This is a big part of how wars end, is when public support evaporates. We will see where all of this goes, but it is a very dangerous situation. And it is certainly profound to the degree that it has changed the impression of Israel on the global stage.
Yeah. Natasha, I mean, look, if I was an Israeli, a regular Israeli, I would be pretty concerned that people like me have come to the place we've come to in this debate. I've been harangued by pro-Palestinians for a long time for being too supportive of Israel's right to defend itself. Harangued, abused, mocked, threatened, all of the things that come with that in a war. But I just felt I couldn't do anything else but speak out. When you launch a 3-month blockade against a people already suffering in the way that these Palestinians have been suffering. And I'm not talking about Hamas, I'm talking about the innocent civilians in Gaza. It's a population of 2 million, with half of them under 18. More than 20,000 children have been killed, even if the UK ambassador has no idea what that number is, but knows exactly how many Hamas terrorists have been killed, oddly. I would just be concerned, if I was an average Israeli, that people that supported us after the horrors of October the 7th are now beginning to go against, certainly in my case, the Israeli government, not the people of Israel, not Jewish people. They will always have my support. But this Israeli government is out of control. We saw and heard from the words of Smodrich last week, the finance minister, a very clear mission statement to clear out all the Palestinians from Gaza. That is a form of genocide, whatever. You're a lawyer. You'll probably tell me it doesn't meet the exact legal criteria of the word genocide. But if you're clearing out an entire people based on their ethnicity from where they live, that to me, and most people around the world who don't have a horse in this race, is a form of genocide. What do you say to that?
Well, Peirs, I'm particularly glad of the opportunity to come on, not before time, and address so much of this misinformation, which seems to be at the core, not just of your shift, but what is a marked shift in the public discussion of this topic. And it is, of course, because of the abuse, the haranguing, the mockery, and the threats and the intimidation that so many people are falling into the easy line.
Well, that's not why I've changed my mind.
Well,
I don't give a damn about who threatens me or how they threaten me or how they mock and abuse me. Listen, I was getting all that long before this war, so I get it on pretty much any debate I ever had. That's fine. I'm a big boy. So please don't misconstrue anything that I have done in terms of a pivot in the way I view this with anything to do with being threatened into it, bullied into it, or cajoled into it, because that would be ridiculous.
Because you've been clear that this is because of the change in the narrative around this. And I hope I'll have the opportunity, and you'll allow me the opportunity to address some of this false information. And there is a great deal of it. It starts with this notion that Israel imposed an entire blockade on aid, which is being put forward without the context of the fact that in the hostage release deal, which preceded it immediately, there were over 25,000 trucks of aid that were facilitated into the Gaza Strip by Israel. The estimates that I have seen is that that should have been a stockpile of between 5 to 6 months of food and humanitarian assistance. Some estimates are in the region of 8 months. Where did that aid go? That is the question I would expect reasonable people without an agenda here to be asking. Where did that aid go if all of these claims of starvation are to be taken seriously? The reality here is that there is no Israeli imposed starvation on the Gaza Strip, that there has been facilitated over the course of
But
this
that is
war.
simply not true. I'm sorry.
Well,
No, hang on. Israel and when the Israeli government, let me phrase that correctly, when the Israeli government ordered 3 months ago a blockade of food and aid going into Gaza,
Yes.
that is a deliberate state-sponsored form of starving a populace.
No, it is not, because it
That's
was
exactly
done.
what happened. That's why they look like they're
No,
starving.
no.
That's why they're risking death
Piers, you've asked me
to
on
get
here.
to scrabbling bits of food.
Forgive me, you've asked me on here to answer these questions.
I can challenge you.
And I just explained that blockade, which was imposed in order to prevent Hamas continuing to fuel its war machine by selling additional aid, that it was diverting, and we'll come on to the way that diversion is going to be prevented in the future, I hope. But the fact of the matter is that this blockade was instituted in the context of there being 5 to 6 months, maybe even 8 months of aid that was facilitated into the Gaza Strip. And throughout, if you'll allow me to finish this point, throughout the war, the volume of aid that Israel has facilitated into Gaza, and this is not being reported by the international media, but it is available, publicly available information published by COGAT, over 1,700,000 tons of aid which has been facilitated into the Gaza Strip, which is more than required for the civilian population. The study that was conducted.
Why are they so hungry then?
The study that was conducted.
Hang on, why are they so hungry?
May I finish this point and I'll come on to answer your question?
Why are they so hungry?
Well,
Why are they stampeding
Piers,
over each other,
we're not
risking
going to-
death to get at scraps of food? I don't understand. If they're all so well nourished and Israel's behaved so impeccably properly in terms of supplying enough food for months on end, why do they all look like they're starving to death and are prepared to risk actually dying to get at food?
What you are basing your assessment on, I'm afraid,
It's what I'm seeing with my own eyes.
which is Hamas propaganda, which you must accept as the
No,
only
it's
thing-
actually footage. I'm watching news footage of thousands of people fighting with each other to get at food. Some of whom ended up dying, some of whom ended up being shot. The IDF says it wasn't them and it was Hamas. We don't know who did it because, as you know, the Israeli government has banned all international journalists from being anywhere near this to verify what is actually happening.
Piers Morgan, you're not allowing me to answer a single question.
I am. And then when you say something that I don't agree with, I'm challenging you.
I'm sure I'm going to say a lot that you don't agree with, because unfortunately your assessment is being based on misinformation, like these false reports we've had today of Israel shooting 31 Palestinians attempting to get to food. That was run, and Ambassador Mike Huckabee has criticised this resoundingly in a statement just now. That was run in the context of the Associated Press, CNN, many media outlets. And it was entirely false, because it is, as has been the case previously.
Hang on. The Israeli government says it was entirely false. What we have had... Sorry, just to correct
It's not just the Israeli government.
Sorry to jump in again.
No, it's also the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
Israel has done one of its own reports, because journalists aren't allowed to verify this independently. So Israel investigates itself and has decided it did nothing wrong.
I'm not referring to Israel's investigation.
Hang on. What we do know is that a number of doctors and hospital spokesmen and charity spokesmen have all said that there were many people killed and many more people wounded, taken to hospitals, and they saw the bodies and they saw the wounded. So somebody was killing and wounding a lot of Palestinians.
We have the drone footage.
You say it was Hamas. Hamas say it was the IDF. We, the international media, cannot verify this because Israel doesn't allow us in to do our job.
That's not why this reporting has been conducted on such a false basis. It's because nothing coming out of the Gaza Strip is able to be reported without Hamas control. And you, as part of the international media, Piers, will know this. I
also know that historically Israel has accepted that the health authorities' numbers, historically, before October the 7th, that they have been broadly accurate. That is the historical position.
You must also know that the assessments of Hamas casualty figures by experts and statisticians have found them to be preposterously inaccurate, fabricated.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let me ask you what I asked you.
No, you're not allowing me to finish a single
answer.
answer.
Well, I can actually conduct this interview any way I like.
Well, then the viewers aren't going to get any benefit of
the viewers can make their own mind up about what they're hearing and seeing. When I interviewed the UK ambassador to the UK,
yes,
she was able to tell me definitively that 30,000 Hamas terrorists had been killed.
I think it was an estimate, let's be clear.
But she had absolutely no idea estimate or otherwise,
Yes.
how many children have been killed in the process? Do you know?
There's a very simple logical explanation for that, which is Israel is targeting Hamas and Palestine.
Do you know how many
Islamic
children
Jihad
Israel's killed in the
terrorists.
process?
There is a very simple explanation for the reason that we do not know, because
You only
Hamas
count
casualty-
you only
No.
count the terrorists
Would
who
you
killed,
like
not the
to
children.
Hear the explanation?
Well, I just ask you, just to be clear, are you saying that the IDF only counts the bodies of terrorists it kills, not innocent children?
Well, the IDF has not been, and this is a shift now, as you will have heard from Jonathan Conricus, has not been in control of any significant part of Gaza to be able to conduct that analysis.
So how does it know how many terrorists it's killing?
Because it is striking them with clear intelligence and targeting those strikes deliberately.
So it counts
and
the bodies of the
identifying-
terrorists, but not the children
No,
it kills in the process.
It counts. I'm sorry, this is perfectly logical.
It's actually not logical at all.
It counts.
To anyone watching this, they're thinking, what on earth are these Israelis saying? First the ambassador, now you. What you're saying is that you only count the terrorists that are killed. You don't count the children that are killed in the process of killing the terrorists.
Perhaps
to
I
which
can
it begs the
provide
question,
you. No, I can
why?
provide you
Why?
with some additional If you'll allow me to answer the question, I'll provide you with some additional analysis, which is in relation to the casualty ratios that have been projected.
How do you know
throughout
the
this war.
ratios?
I'll explain. The casualty ratio throughout the first period of the war, phase 1, was generally put at between 1 to 1 and 1.5
How do you
to
know?
1. I'll explain. Since then, in phase 2, because of a very different type of fighting that we're now seeing, there are some estimates that it may have gone up to 2 to 1.
How do you know?
Very simply, that Israel has been able to establish...
How do you know if you're not counting?
May I answer the question?
Well, you're not counting the civilians you're killing, so how do you know the ratio?
Well, if you're not going to allow me to
You talk
answer the
about
question,
logic. Let me go to. I want to bring
No,
Dave.
no,
I don't know.
you've just asked me the
let me
I've
get
let
in
you
here
speak
a
for a long
little
time.
bit.
Dave
you
is.
haven't, Peirs.
Well, I have, and I'll let you speak again. We've got plenty of time here.
I'm sorry, but
there's no much.
Mr.
No, I'm
Smith's
sorry,
introduction was
but it's
entirely
my show.
uninterrupted.
I'm going to go to
Yes.
Dave. Dave, I'm told I'm lacking logic here. Is there anything logical about what we're hearing about how they apparently know the exact ratio of terrorists they're killing to civilians, but they don't know how many civilians they're killing? How do you know the ratio?
Peirs, it's just too ridiculous. And as you know, Peirs, and look, I know that you've been, I think, very, as you said before, I don't want to put you on either side of this debate, because I think actually people who are hardcore on either side of this debate probably see you as someone on the other side.
Yeah, they all hate me. The extremists all hate me.
Right.
That's fine.
No,
Yeah.
not all. I didn't mean to say they all
No,
hate
but
you. A lot of us
they
like you.
actually
Peirs.
do. They actually do. The ones who are to the
look, I think-
extremities on both sides, they all
One
hate
of the
me.
things that any honest observer has noticed since the very beginning of this conflict is that the Israelis, including the highest levels of the Israeli government, they just speak out of both sides of their mouth the whole time. And so it's like, which argument are we even taking on? I mean, they'll sit here and say from the very beginning that the goal is just to get the hostages back and to defeat Hamas, while their finance minister is openly talking about how the goal is to cleanse the entire strip.
He's not even
And of course,
hiding
now
it.
we see,
He says
yes,
it.
yes.
He
And
literally
and
says
we
it
actually
in
see
front of the world.
Yes. And we see them now putting this into plans into action to do this. So how are we to judge this? They'll sit here and say that they've taken painstaking efforts to make sure that they limit the number of civilians that are killed, while also saying they have no idea how many civilians are being killed, and they don't count the number because that's not who they're targeting. You'll sit here and say we're only targeting Hamas, or that we're only intentionally targeting Hamas, and at the same time think about the argument they're even making as Smotrich is out bragging about how not one grain of wheat will get into Gaza for this 3-month period that you're referring to. But they'll say, hey, look, they have stockpiles of aid that had gone in there previously. It's like, okay, Peirs, so then logically, can't we deduce you're not starving Hamas? They've got plenty of food. Then who is the additional blockade supposed to impact? It's the civilian population. And so, listen, I'm sorry, this is just anybody with just common sense and a basic understanding of logic could tell you that none of these defenses make any sense. And instead, I think it's reasonable for us to say that we're going to judge the Israeli government, and I like that you were precise about that. We're talking about the government of a foreign country, not people who believe in Judaism across the world, and not even necessarily the people of that country. But when I'm judging the Israeli government, I'm sorry, I'm going to judge them based off what their actions are, and I'm going to judge them based off what their motives are when they admit the truth.
Yeah.
And so you could sit here and say, oh, we're doing everything we can to prevent the children the number of children dying, and then brag about the ratio, but at the same time tell me you don't even know the number of children who are dying. The bottom line here, and this is why global opinion is turning against Israel, is the level of human suffering that is being inflicted by Israel on the people of Gaza is evil. It is pure freaking evil, and it doesn't need to be done this way. And if you think you can get away with this with a decentralized media and with smartphones and with 4K high def images and with the ability through social media today for people to communicate in a non-controlled environment, good freaking luck, man. This is going to end up so bad for everyone. It's already ended up so bad for the poor people of Gaza. But I just can't. I'm truly stunned, Peirs, and I'm sure you are too. I am stunned by the lack of rational self-preservation on the part of the Israelis. Like, read the room here. You are turning the entire world against you, and I do not understand why they would choose to do this.
Yeah, I mean, look, Natasha, I was editor of the Daily Mirror 20 years ago when we launched a long campaign to stop this country, the UK, going to war in Iraq, which I thought was an illegal invasion of a sovereign country. And it may be very unpopular with the then Labour government led by Tony Blair, because we were the Labour-supporting newspaper. My point being, my argument then was not with the people of the United Kingdom. My argument was with the government of the United Kingdom making a decision which I felt was illegal and wrong, probably constituted war crimes, and it turned out to be a complete unmitigated disaster that led to 20 more years of mayhem in the Middle East, including the rise of ISIS and all the hell that they brought with them. So this, just to be clear again, I do not have an argument with Jewish people or with Israelis. I totally understand why after October the 7th, so many people in Israel felt so vulnerable, felt so angry, felt so distressed, so heartbroken by the devastating loss. 250 odd people kidnapped and taken hostage, including babies and Holocaust survivors. Over 1,200 people murdered, 7,000 wounded by 3,000 terrorists breaking over a border to attack anyone they got their hands on. I don't need reminding of what happened that day. That is why I defended Israel's right to defend itself so staunchly. But I cannot defend what is happening now. What is happening now is militarily inexplicable to most people I've spoken to in the military. I have a lot in my family. Nobody understands what Israel's goal is here, other than flattening Gaza and kicking off. Well, hang on. As Smodrich has said, it is to take over and clear out Gaza of all the Palestinians. That is genocide, isn't it? Unless, I mean, you're a lawyer. No, you tell me.
Israel's war aims have been clear from the outset, which is the destruction of Hamas.
They haven't done that.
And the return of the hostages. Well, because the war's not over yet.
You haven't done either of those things. All you're doing is killing more and more civilians, and you've been starving them.
Well, but who's you? Forgive me. I'm here as a lawyer.
The Israeli government, and you're here to defend it, right?
No, I'm here to defend the rule of law and the weaponization of international law, which has been consistent throughout this process. The propaganda that we're discussing right now, which is clearly what has shifted your position and perspective on this,
what do you mean by propaganda?
Is deeply dangerous. Calling Israel a committer of genocide or saying that it is starving children.
Well, actually, the people alleging that Israel's committing war crimes are two former Israeli prime ministers.
Who have their own political agendas here, let's
be clear. How convenient. The two former prime ministers of the country have said that you are committing, as a government, not you, but the government is committing war crimes, and you dismiss it as just a bit of internal politics.
Well, no, it's a very serious matter that the misinformation that I would like to be able to come on to address is now also being propagated by two very sore individuals, Prime Minister Olmert, because he also served a prison sentence, and has had his entire proposed peace framework, that of essentially creating a Palestinian state in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, turned upside down by the realization, and he hasn't had, unfortunately, the temerity after the 7th of October to recognize the risk that he would have put Israel to in light of the Hamas takeover.
And when you see, as we saw, and when you see, Natasha,
I was answering the previous question.
Okay, but let me just, on the point of legality, actually it's very productive. On the point of legality, only last week the Israeli government announced new settlements, 22 settlements.
Well, no, can we pause?
Well, hang on.
Yes.
On the West Bank, 22 settlements, which
Yes.
the international community views as illegal. They announced 22 new settlements. As a lawyer, given your adherence to the point of law, presumably you would condemn that.
Well, this is exactly why we need to be clear about how international law applies and why the notion of these so-called illegal settlements is a misnomer.
You don't think they are?
It's not a legal term, it's a political term, and it is part and parcel of a misapplication of international law to the status of the territory. These blood libels, occupation, ethnic cleansing,
Wow, so you
colonialism,
think the settlements are not
apartheid
illegal?
and genocide are all part and parcel of the propaganda, which I would like to be able to come on to, because all of the evidence goes in completely the opposite direction. In terms of Israel's compliance with the laws of armed conflict and its in the amount of steps that Israel takes, unprecedented in the history of armed conflict, and military
Actually,
commanders
that's just a
will tell
load
you,
of bullshit. I'm sorry, it just is.
which other army
It just
sends
is.
warnings
Which
as
other
to-
war in recent times have you had half the population is under 18 and you killed 20,000 kids in
Those figures
20
are
months?
Hamas figures that you are
Well,
constantly
give me an example of where this morality has been played out elsewhere.
I was explaining earlier that the Hamas figures are inflated, that there are internal
How
inconsistencies.
convenient for you. You don't know what the figures are, so how do you know?
That because there have been independent
How
studies.
do you know
by
how many figures are
statisticians.
inflated or otherwise? You don't know how many have been
Because
killed.
we know Hamas lies. It is an internationally prescribed terrorist
Well,
organisation.
some might
And
think
the
you're
fact-
lying
the
because
fact
you
that-
say on one hand, I don't know how many children have been killed, but on the other hand, and that's a blood libel if you say we've killed any of them, but on the other hand...
That's not what I said, no.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you know all about the ratios and you know how humane
Would you like
the
to
Israeli
understand
forces
why?
are being, but you don't know how many they're killing.
Because even on Hamas figures, which we know to be false, which do not make distinctions
You
between
don't know
civilians
they're
and
false.
We do, because there
How
has
do you
been-
know they're false? You
because-
don't know how many have been killed.
Because Hamas has even itself revised those figures down and acknowledged that they are false. And the UN is still touting.
So how many
false
children has
figures on
Israel
that.
killed?
If we go back to the
Well, can
question,
you answer my question?
If you go back to the ratio,
Do you know my
question-
do you
no,
know-
but I can tell you the ratio, even on the
what's-
basis of Hamas figures.
You can tell me the ratio without, but how do you know if you don't know how
I
many
can
have
tell you the
died?
ratio even on the basis of the false Hamas
So you've
figures.
no idea how many have been killed, but you can tell me the ratio.
I can tell you the ratio.
You're
on
a
the basis-
smart lawyer.
on
Do you
the-
not understand how ridiculous that
Are you
sounds?
listening to
If
my
we were in a
answer?
courtroom now,
I can
you
tell
would
you-
be demolished
No.
by a fellow lawyer. They would say, what are you talking about?
Piers, this is not how courtroom etiquette is conducted, I'm afraid. I would be permitted
Actually, some
to
of my
finish-
favourite lawyers conduct them exactly like this.
I would be permitted to finish a sentence. The reason we can say that the ratio before the ceasefire was 1-to-1 or 1.15 to 1 is on the basis even of Hamas figures.
Well, 1-to-1 or
despite
5-to-1? Which one was it?
1-to-1 to 1.5 to 1. At different points in that period, those were the two separate.
That you'd have to know how many innocent people
that is
you've
on the
killed
basis
as well.
of the false Hamas figures. So the reality is that the expectation would be the ratio is
You
in
don't
fact
believe
lower
that.
than
So
that.
what is the number?
The reality is that the expectation would be the numbers are even less than that. That, in any event, is unprecedented in the history of urban armed conflict. So it puts the lie to all of these accusations that we have been hearing. And the reason, let me finish this sentence, if you will. The reason that it is so terrible, that it is so dangerous that these lies are being spread about Israel, that even you and other respected international journalists have begun to propagate them, is that it is having a direct
calling me a liar?
impact. No, that you have been taken in by them.
Really?
Is because it is having a direct impact on the safety of Jews around the world. We've seen the impact of 14,000 babies in 48 hours when 2 Israeli staffers were murdered, executed on the streets of DC. Only yesterday we saw a fire attack
What was the link?
against-
What was the link there? Are you saying
the
that
fact
the
that
person?
2 days after
are you
Tom
saying the person
Fletcher-
that perpetrated that appalling murder was actually even aware of the story you're talking about? You're
Well,
drawing a direct link.
The Chicagan that committed that murder shouted "Free Palestine," and this is for Gaza.
You mentioned something about 48,000
Two
babies.
days after that full story went around the
It
world.
was a full story because the idiot that came out with it should have known better. I didn't promote that in any way at all, other than to say.
But you
he
are
was an
promoting
idiot.
false allegations of starvation and targeting
No,
civilians.
I'm promoting the fact that Israel's government launched a 3-month blockade, which has led
without
to
the context
people
of
starving.
25,000 tons of
All right.
trucks of
Let me
aid
bring
having
David.
been provided before that.
Dave.
Facts without
All right.
context are misleading.
All right, Dave, we're a bunch of deluded clowns who are being misled. Israel's government is telling the whole truth here. Everyone else is lying or being taken in by life.
Yeah, it's just like, look, the
And we're
logical
putting
contradictions here.
Jews in danger by promoting these lies. You're a Jewish guy.
Yes, I am, and maybe I'll respond to that. Well, first of all, I'll just say that even the idea, like as you hear these arguments, Peirs, where they'll say like, well, we know these numbers that the Gaza Health Ministry puts out are lies because we know Hamas lies, and look, the proof of that is that they revised their numbers down at one point. But doesn't that just kind of lead to the question, Peirs? Then, like, why would they revise their numbers down
why
if
wouldn't
they're
they
just
double
lying?
them?
Why? Yeah, right. Why wouldn't they just stick with the original
It's
numbers
not
that they had?
logical, to quote the buzzword of the debate.
It's what always happens with the pro-Israel people is like they use what is a point on my side as a point on their side.
And by the way, I wouldn't trust Hamas as far as I could bloody throw them, right? They're a bunch of despicable death cult murderers, right? Just to be crystal clear. I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. And yet historically, their figures through this health authority in this conflict going back decades have turned out to be reasonably accurate. I know that because Israel has accepted them over the years.
And Peirs, as you know, because I've been coming on your show for a long time now, I've always said the same thing too. I also don't really trust the Gaza Health Ministry. I'm just making the point that them revising the numbers down would be a point of evidence that they're being honest, not a point of evidence that you can't trust them. But look, I will just say this, okay? And Peirs, again, because I've been coming on your show, I've done a lot of these debates, over the last year and a half or so. I would never, like, if you remember, there was this example of the guy in Florida who is being charged with attempted murder right now because he shot two people who he thought were Palestinians. Turned out they weren't. He was wrong. But I would never use that as an example in one of these debates and say, aha, pro-Israel person, you're responsible for that.
Right.
I'm a free market libertarian, free market capitalist guy. There was a Bernie Sanders fan who shot up a congressional baseball game several years back. I would never use that in an argument and say, you're responsible for that, because it's the cheapest, lamest form of argument. You are not responsible if you're telling the truth as you see it for some crazy person committing a horrific act of violence. By the way, we're talking about ongoing innocent people being killed for over 20 months at this point now. So like, that's what the whole conversation is about. But the idea that any of us are responsible. Look, here's the bottom line, Peirs. I understand Natasha wants to sit here and say, the reason you've changed your mind is because you've fallen for the propaganda. You've fallen for the lies. The reason why everyone is so outraged is because they're falling for these propaganda. The truth is that the reason why Peirs and so many people around the world are turning on what the Israeli government is doing is because it's just so freaking horrible. Because we're seeing images every day of children suffering through an ungodly fate. We all sit there and think, my God, if those were our kids. It's a pure reaction to witnessing evil. And you got to sit here and spin the fact that this is all propaganda or it's all lies. I mean, look, I admire you being a lawyer and trying to defend your client. I guess that's what lawyers got to do, no matter how guilty your client is. Peirs, if I'm ever charged with murder, get this lady to represent me. So that's who I want on my team. But the bottom line is that two former Israeli prime ministers are not falling for propaganda.
And you know what, Dave?
Just that
you know
at this
what?
point,
one of them,
they can't deny it.
Right, and one of them, Ehud Omar, he said to me that he thinks Netanyahu, A, should have resigned by now, but B, will be in The Hague one day being held accountable for these war crimes. And I mean, I guess my question for you, Natasha, you're a lawyer. Would you be prepared to defend him if Netanyahu appeared at The Hague?
We're talking about the International Criminal Court.
Would you be prepared to defend him?
No, well, let me be clear about the context, because this is important. We're talking about the International Criminal Court, which has no jurisdiction in this matter because Israel is not a party to the ICC and Palestine is not a state. It clearly made significant errors on prior determinations of jurisdiction on the basis of an accession document, supposedly by the Palestinian Authority, which was never circulated. That was one of the primary planks of its decision in 2021, which has fallen away. It is proceeded on this basis in contravention of its own rules, that of complementarity, and on an entirely false basis. So my organisation, UK Lawyers for Israel, has put out a review of Karim Khan's application for warrants, which demonstrated that every phrase of every sentence of that document was false. In that context, we're not seeing an international criminal court anymore. We're seeing a political body which is seeking to rehabilitate itself by going after the leaders of the world's Jewish state because of its abysmal reputation.
Is there anyone who criticises the Israeli government that you don't think is doing so for political reasons or because they're being deluded by
Oh my
lies?
goodness, yes.
In other words, is anybody actually acting, do you think, with any integrity
Well, within
when they
Israel.
criticise the Israeli government?
Within
Because you
Israel.
make it sound like everyone's either stupid, deluded, or politically motivated.
Within Israel, there is the most vibrant political debate and criticism that you will see anywhere. What I'm calling out are the lies and the falsehoods and the blood libels that are being propagated. And those
I was
that are
told by the ambassador
interested-
to UK it was a blood libel for me to suggest that Israel had killed children in this
No,
war.
I don't believe that was the case.
There
I think it
was.
was to do with targeting children.
No.
And there is a difference.
Right.
Because we are hearing that Israel is targeting children, and that couldn't be further from
Well,
the fact,
last week,
because
9 out of 10 children in one home
Well,
where 2 doctors
you know-
reside were killed in an airstrike.
Well,
was that? What
isn't
was
it
that?
remarkable?
Well, what was that?
That has been based only on the basis of hearsay.
You don't
and
believe that
secondhand
story?
Information. I want these stories.
Wait a minute. You don't believe
Yes.
that those children were killed?
I have seen conflicting accounts, and I want that story to be properly investigated
Wow.
before the international media
Wow.
runs with it. I have
You
a
think
question.
those 2 parents, one of whom I think operated on one of the children,
I have a question.
you think that those 2 doctors, the parents, they just made it up?
Why are
that
those
9 of
children
their
there?
10 children had been blown to pieces
Yes.
by an Israeli airstrike?
If this is true,
You don't believe it?
well, why on earth was artificially generated imagery used to promote this story when it first
I
happened?
got to say,
We've seen
Natasha,
time
I
and
think
time
what you've
again-
just said about that
Piers
family
Morgan, we've seen
is despicable.
We've seen time
I'm
and time
sorry,
again.
Yeah, is
it's
that a- is that
despicable.
blood
What is
libel?
truly
As somebody, you talk
despicable-
about blood libel, like Dave said. You talk about blood libel. You talk about lies.
All I said,
you talk about
Piers,
promoting
was that there were
propaganda.
conflicting
And here you
accounts.
sit here as a lawyer and you say that you do not believe those 9 children were
I
killed.
didn't say that. You're putting
You
words
did?
in my mouth.
Do you believe it or not?
I said that there were conflicting
Do you
accounts
believe it?
and it needs to be
Do
investigated.
you believe it?
I thought you would be the
The parents
first
said 9 of their
person
10
that wants-
children were killed.
They
Do you
haven't-
believe them
they
or not?
haven't- they
Or did
haven't
those
said
2
that directly.
doctors make it up?
They haven't said that directly as far as I have seen. I have seen second-hand accounts and hearsay. But it's important to ask, why are these civilians still there? Why is it that
Actually, no, it's
uniquely-
important to ask whether
No,
you believe that family
No.
have lost 9 of their 10 children.
I want
Actually,
to know why the international
you don't, do
community...
you? You don't. And this goes to the point that I would say about Israel
Why are
generally
these
now, in this war now.
Palestinian civilians-
Israel says they don't believe anything.
Coming out of Hamas,
every
indeed.
story that comes out
Yep.
about the deaths of civilians in Gaza,
Because there is a
someone
track
will
record
pop
of
up
lies.
representing the Israeli government saying, it's propaganda, it's not true, I've heard it's not right, I've heard it didn't happen. And the reason you can get away with it, frankly, is because you won't allow, the Israeli government won't allow, I don't want to keep putting you in the government, but but you defend them. The Israeli government refuses to allow international journalists to get in there and do their job and verify whether any of these things are actually
So I
happening
have been
when you
there.
say they didn't happen.
I can help you with why. I've been there in September and seen a great deal of the Hamas terror infrastructure with my own eyes, including the fact that when we were in Rafah, every second building was being used
you see any dead
by
children?
Hamas. No, and this is the
Wow.
important factor.
Why do you think that?
Our movements...
Is that because there
very-
aren't any,
No.
or because you were being given a sanitized little tour,
No, we were
which
being-
didn't involve seeing the bodies of dead children?
We were very restricted because of the nature of the battlefield in
What
in
right does the
Gaza.
IDF have to restrict journalists doing their job? In every
well, on
other
the
war I've
basis-
ever been involved in, including sending my Daily Mirror journalists to cover the Iraq war in Baghdad, where they rang me at midnight to ask if they should leave or stay in a hotel, the Baghdad Hilton, I think it was called, before shock and awe arrived. So huge responsibility on my shoulders then about the lives of my journalists, but they were prepared to risk them to report the truth to the wider world. Israel has decided no journalists from outside can go in
For 3 reasons.
and make that assessment themselves.
Yes.
What right does Israel have to do that?
For 3 reasons. Will you allow me to finish?
Well, there are no reasons.
well, you've
It's
just
none of
asked
your
me-
business
you've
whether
just-
the journalists view
You
their
don't-
safety
you
as being at
haven't-
risk.
I'm sorry, you haven't heard the reasons yet. The first, of course, is the safety of the journalists, and I appreciate you don't accept that. The second,
I think it's a load of
the
nonsense.
second is the
The
safety.
idea you're doing is that some quaint concern for the safety of journalists is bullshit.
That was reason number one.
Utter
Reason
bullshit.
Reason number two is the
These better
ability.
get better.
Is the ability of IDF soldiers to be able to conduct this war against Hamas without.
Oh,
losing
without the
focus-
journalists getting in the way?
No, without.
They've actually, by the way, they've killed more journalists in Palestinian journalists than in any war
Hamas
in
members
modern
wearing
history.
press vests are not journalists. And reason number three.
So none of them are journalists.
And reason number three.
So just to be clear, none of the Palestinian journalists who've been killed are actually
I
journalists?
said Hamas members.
Oh, they're all Hamas
Palestinian
members?
Islamic, those that are. And those
Every
that belong
single
to,
dead
that's not what I
Palestinian
said.
journalist
I
is a
don't-
member of Hamas. Is that your position?
No, listen, I appreciate Peirs. This
That is
your
also
style.
bullshit.
But
No, I'm not going to let you bullshit.
misrepresenting every
So that's
word
2 out of
we
2.
don't
What's the
know.
third reason?
Our mutual friend Douglas Murray was embedded with the IDF in Lebanon.
You said the words yourself. I love Douglas, but he was embedded with the IDF.
Right.
He's unbelievably
But in
pro-Israel.
let me finish.
So of course
Will
he
you
was
allow
going
me
to
to
write
finish?
what
No.
he witnessed while embedded with the IDF.
No, let me finish what his experiences there were. The difference
I
is
read
that in
it.
Lebanon,
You have to tell me.
There is something I think that you won't. The IDF are able to allow journalists into Lebanon. He wasn't the only one. There were many other
There
international
have been a
journalists with him.
tiny... No.
Those other
bullshit.
international journalists with him
Bullshit.
were very clear.
There
that
have been a tiny
beg your
handful of journalists led in by the IDF in
I
tightly
appreciate-
controlled environments
Yes. And you
to
know-
witness what the IDF were prepared to let them
And
see.
you know what those
And actually, what it
journalists
needs this
said?
war to stop the bullshit, which is out of control, by the way, in this last 3 minutes, is to let international journalists go in and do their jobs. And they will worry with their networks or organizations about their safety, but they should be allowed to do their jobs. And there's only one reason why the Israeli government doesn't want international journalists crawling all over Gaza. It's because they do not want them reporting
Peirs.
what they will find.
Reason number
which, by the
3.
way, will include the bodies of thousands of children who you on the Israeli side are not counting as you count the terrorists you kill, but who journalists would.
Reason number 3 is that those journalists that were in Lebanon said that they had to be very careful about what they reported because of what Hezbollah would do to their colleagues in Beirut. The fact that international journalists have sunk to this level, that they would allow their reportage to be controlled by terrorist organizations, Iranian proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah included, is despicable. That is the real issue here that has driven
Actually,
the
it's not.
international
The real
community.
issue
Of course
is-
it is.
it is,
This
well,
is terrorist organizations
the real-
propaganda.
actually,
that
it's
you
not.
have
Let me
eaten
bring
up.
David- let me
and
bring
the fact
David.
that you will not allow me to answer a single question
You know what?
here
You've made
will
all
be
your
perfectly
points, and they
evident to
all,
your
I'm
viewers.
afraid,
I
Natasha,
haven't. I certainly
turned out
haven't
to be
made all my
bullshit.
points.
So let me bring in Dave. Dave, look, I don't like to keep saying the word bullshit, but when you hear a lot of bullshit, you have to call it for what it is, bullshit. And the truth is, particularly on the journalist front, there is a very simple way that all this fog of war confusion could be resolved, and that is to let the journalists in. And there's a very simple reason why they're not. They don't want the journalists to report to the world what is actually going on. Otherwise, they'd let them in.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I understand, Natasha, that you're upset that Peirs isn't letting you finish your thought, but the idea that the number one reason you gave is that what Israel just values the sanctity of life so much that they're so worried about these journalists, it's just so ridiculous.
Actually,
it doesn't
it's
pass the
offensive,
basic smell
honestly,
test. It's offensive to think that level, you talk about propaganda being spread. That is just pure
Who's going to be
propaganda.
blamed
It is
for these
obvious.
journalist deaths?
It is obviously the reason
Hang on,
Israel
who's going to
doesn't
be
let-
blamed? Sorry, Natasha just said, who will be blamed for the journalist deaths? A recognition that yet more journalists would be killed, because I think it's well over 100
why Israel
Palestinians
hasn't
who you
wanted
think
to-
are all Hamas members. But you know what? It's not your job to worry about the safety of international journalists. They've all been to many, many war zones.
That's
Whether it's
extremely
Clarissa Ward at
hypocritical.
CNN,
Yes.
Jeremy
To say
Bowen
that
at
and to
BBC.
accuse
I
Israel
know a
of
lot of these
killing
people
journalists in the
myself.
same breath.
You let the journalists do their job, and you do yours.
Yeah, by the way,
and the
Peirs-
IDF can do
Peirs,
theirs.
They don't seem to have this concern about being blamed for slaughtering the children of Gaza.
they don't admit
that's not
they're
enough to
killing
get them
any.
to stop that. Right, right. As every time you hear, it's either, this is propaganda, this is Hamas propaganda, those kids weren't intentionally killed, all this stuff. But look, like we said at the beginning, it doesn't meet the basic smell test, the basic human test. If you're telling me, as you said, Natasha, that Hamas has locked up all of the aid that's gotten in there, so who are you targeting when you don't let further aid in? It's the civilian population who's not getting it. Now, you could sit here and say Israel isn't targeting them, meaning I blow up a building that I know has little children in it, but I'm claiming I'm targeting the bad guy. But you know that in effect, your action is going to, in effect, destroy the civilian population. I'm sorry, this is a distinction without a difference. And I don't care about your appeal to international law. Look, I'm Lysander Spooner on this issue of international law. I think either international law allows what Israel is doing to Gaza, or it's been powerless to stop it. So So either way, it has not been effective enough. By the way, it does seem like it's the latter, not the former, seeing as how there is, criminal warrants out for Netanyahu for committing war crimes. But regardless of that, the bottom line here is that Israel is doing this to the civilian population of Gaza, and nobody who's being honest doesn't believe that the only reason Israel won't let journalists in there is because they don't want the world to see what they're doing to these people. Period. That's the reason, and everybody, including you, knows it. The problem here is that you're not allowed to tell the truth. You're Israel's lawyer, and you got to defend them no matter what. Natasha, does Israel have nuclear weapons?
Sorry, I'm an independent
Does Israel have nuclear weapons?
Of the English bar.
Yes or no?
That's a good question.
I'm not instructed.
Yes or no?
I'm
yes
not
or no,
instructed.
Natasha? Do they have
Does
nuclear
Israel
weapons?
have nuclear weapons, Natasha?
Why do you think I would know any better than you, Piers?
What's the name of your company?
You do know. You
What's the
are
name of your
not telling the
organization?
truth, and so you won't say it.
Well,
By the way, this
hang on.
right here, Piers,
Yeah.
let me just say, it's disqualifying to this conversation. You're playing a different game than me and Piers are. We're having a conversation about what's actually going on. You're a lawyer who's not allowed to incriminate your client, which is Israel, because you know the answer the same way Piers knows it, the same way I know it. Do they have nukes?
Let me be perfectly clear. I am not in the employ of anyone associated.
What's the name
with
of your
the State of Israel.
organisation?
UK Lawyers for Israel began as a voluntary association of lawyers looking for the proper application of law to Israel, Israelis, and combating anti-Semitism. It is truly remarkable. We are having a different conversation. This is a circus, and I am actually seeking to address practical questions, including the disgusting situation that we are now left with, where the international community has said that Palestinian civilians must uniquely be kept in a war zone, may not be permitted to leave. That is what I am hearing being advocated for consistently, so that they can be continued to be used not just as human shields by Hamas, but as human sacrifices, dragging this conflict out. The tragedy of this misinformation and this propaganda is not just that Jews are being gunned down and burned in the street. It is also that Palestinian civilians are continuing to suffer as a result of this war, but also of Hamas suppression, repression, torture, and the stealing of aid, which has been well documented. The fact that people like the two of you will continue to put out this false information, to perpetuate this conflict, to perpetuate Palestinian suffering is truly disgusting. What have I said that's false?
I didn't think anyone could be more disingenuous than the UK ambassador. I got to say, Natasha, you've got right up there. You've crossed that little bar, haven't you?
If you can indicate one aspect of what I have said that is incorrect, we will have this conversation. But so far, you are throwing out appallingly misconceived allegations, which are baseless.
Do you know what?
Piers,
Israel.
Notice she couldn't answer the question.
I had Jonathan
about whether Israel
Conricus
has
on, who was a
nukes.
former IDF guy, obviously, and even he was able to admit a lot of what Israel is now doing is wrong, and it just shouldn't be happening the way that it's happening. When you blindly don't, I mean, I think that Hamas are blindly ideologically to one side of this. They're a bunch of genocidal maniacs. I think people like Smodrich are genocidal maniacs, and I think anyone on the pro-Israeli side, particularly a lawyer who can listen to what Smodrich said last week and not understand that he is actually promoting war crimes out of his very mouth.
We haven't discussed Smotrich, and I'm not particularly interested in what he has to say because it's.
Well, he's the finance minister of the Israeli government. He's one of the three most powerful people in the country.
He clearly doesn't have an input to the war cabinet's policy
or how this
campaign has been run.
Even you don't believe that if you say it.
Well, I wouldn't be saying it if I didn't believe it.
You don't think that Smodrich has much influence over the Israeli government?
Not on the conduct.
Has he done anything about the Israeli government?
Not on the conduct of this war,
Goebbels didn't have any control over policy. Therefore, it doesn't matter what he said.
I didn't interrupt Mr. Smith. The fact of the matter is that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Everything that the Israeli, the Air Force, and the Military Advocate General Corps, which is actually unique in the manner in which it approves strikes and the military tactics that the IDF launched. In fact, when I was on the ground in Gaza, including with a very senior military official from the UK, Sir John McCall, all of the group remarked that the procedures that Israel had put in place were unprecedented, that it wasn't just adhering to international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict, but in every respect was going far above the requirements, including in taking precautions to prevent civilian casualties.
How have they been so careful? Have they managed to destroy 70% of Gaza and killed, I think it's 50 to 60,000 people?
Well, those again are Hamas figures, which
What's the figure,
not
then?
accurate.
What's the figure?
Well, you heard, I think, from the ambassador, 30,000.
How many people have you killed?
30,000. There you go with you again. I think there's been some misbriefing in this.
Well, you seem to be speaking on behalf of the government.
No, I'm speaking on behalf of the facts and the proper application of law, which I appreciate neither of you seem to be particularly interested in. But I will maintain my interest, in particular, the fact that these casualty figures by Hamas do not take account of how these people have said to have died. We know Hamas are shooting their own civilians. That false report of Palestinian civilians at aid centres being targeted by Israel, that was in fact Hamas shooting them.
You don't know that.
We have the drone
You don't
footage,
know that.
And we have
You actually don't know
accounts.
who killed them.
We have consistent accounts.
The investigation is still going on, but of course it's an Israeli investigation,
Right.
which will doubtless exonerate the Israeli forces.
We also know that Palestinian civilians are killed by indiscriminate missiles. Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas rockets, when they fall short in the Gaza Strip, they don't fall with a proportionality analysis. They don't fall precisely in the way that Israeli strikes are conducted with warnings before.
If you're doing everything so magnificently by the book, why is it that so many allies of Israel are now queuing up, and former prime ministers of Israel are queuing up to condemn it? Are they all utterly deluded?
No, there are two particular reasons for this. The first is what we have seen with the manufacturing of this disinformation that comes out of Gaza from Hamas, that is promoted by NGOs formerly respected like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, that is then in turn reported by UN special rapporteurs, that finds its way into Security Council resolutions or General Assembly resolutions, that then in turn makes it up to institutions like the ICC and the ICJ. And then once that circle of disinformation is complete, these matters are often re-reported by the NGOs that started this disinformation cycle in the first place. That's reason number one. Reason number two is because of the mode in which the international media have conducted their reporting of this conflict. We have the Al-Ali hospital as a prime example on the 17th of October 2023. Immediately it was reported that this was an Israeli airstrike. That was false. Peirs, just like the reports of Israel targeting Palestinian civilians trying to get aid were false. I urge you to use a little bit of logic here to assess what on earth Israel's objective could be, targeting civilians or hitting hospitals like this willy-nilly, which it does not do without good reason, because Hamas has used them as command and control centers, and when it provides warnings to enable civilians to evacuate. Why on earth would Israel be targeting Palestinian civilians when it has been seeking from the get-go to evacuate them, to provide humanitarian corridors, which it has defended, even though Hamas has fired onto these civilians as they seek to flee areas where Hamas has embedded its terror infrastructure in these civilian areas, in mosques, schools, hospitals, and every second house when I was in Rafah that we saw. That is the truly...
How many houses did you see?
That is the truly...
How many houses did you see?
Well, many of them were destroyed,
Well, how many
unfortunately.
did you see? You said every second house.
Tens.
You saw
yes.
10 houses.
No, tens,
So,
plural.
10.
The
Well, how
fact
many?
of the matter
Well,
is...
hang on, how many?
But Hamas
You said
are
every
clear.
second house.
Yes.
So how many did you see?
No, every second house.
How many
in
houses
Rafah
did you go into?
Doesn't matter.
It does matter.
Because
You've made a statement. You said every second house. How many did you go into?
the houses were
Give me a
no longer
number.
left there to
You
go
know how
into.
many
I said
houses you went into?
Tens.
What? 10, 15, 20?
Pairs. You're missing the point here, I'm
No,
afraid.
I know the point.
The point is that
You've
Hamas-
made a claim.
Hamas
I've simply
makes
asked
no-
you to give me a number. Numbers are not your strong point. I know that.
I beg your pardon?
But I imagine you remember how many houses you went into.
No, we saw destroyed houses in the Rafah area because Hamas has been using these houses as part of its terror infrastructure.
How do you know?
Because they make clear
You just
their
said you went
tactic.
into them and you...
No, I
you said,
never-
You said,
Again, you're putting words in my mouth. If you would listen, I think things would be a lot clearer.
Right.
Hamas have
so
made
you
it
know what
clear-
was inside houses, even though you didn't go inside them, and they were all obliterated.
Well, you know I couldn't go inside them because they were booby-trapped by
You
Hamas.
didn't go
But what I
inside them,
did
and they were
see-
all destroyed.
What I did
but
see,
you knew they were all full of Hamas stuff.
What I did see
How?
was drone footage that goes into
drone footage,
that
okay.
went into these houses that
So
demonstrated.
you didn't go into the houses, you didn't see any Hamas stuff in there, but you saw drone
Here's-
footage
can I
that
later.
demonstrated
Supplied to you
how
by the
Hamas.
IDF.
Well, look,
All right,
Hamas
Dave-
make it very clear.
You know
If you
what,
won't
I'm sorry,
take
it's
my
just all
word for it,
flannel, isn't it?
You always take Hamas's word for it. So listen to what they
Yeah,
say.
you wouldn't take your
we all-
word for it. It
we-
sounds like a lot of
Yes,
old
right.
bullshit again.
Well, it's
Dave.
like, listen, Peirs, as I've dealt with this argument with Douglas Murray and now here today, this is about as serious as Dennis Rodman claiming that Kim Jong-un showed him a supermarket full of food. You know, I mean, I don't know what to say here. And it would be equally ridiculous if I went on some Hamas-sponsored tour and then came back telling you that everything they say is correct. Here's the bottom line. I have a much more clear, logical answer. The reason why two former Israeli prime ministers, including Omar, who is a right-winger, who was Sharon's guy. This is not as if this is some left-wing anti-war peacenik or something like that. The reason why two former Israeli prime ministers have come out and said that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza is because Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza. The reason why Israel will not let journalists into Gaza is because Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza. And the reason why Israel is killing Palestinian civilians in Gaza and the reason why they're building up more settlements in the West Bank is because, as Smotrich has said, as Katz, the defense minister, has said this week, and as Benjamin Netanyahu has said for years and years and years, their plan is greater Israel. They want Gaza and the West Bank. They call it Judea and Samaria. They believe that it's rightfully Israel's. Benjamin Netanyahu showed up to the United Nations a couple weeks before October 7th with a map where it was all Israel. That's the bottom line. It's why they've been controlling these territories since 1967. See, the truth makes a lot more sense. And by the way, you know that Israel has nuclear weapons, but you won't say it on this program because you're not in the business of telling the truth about this conflict. You're in the business of defending Israel, which is fine. That's what you want to do. But all three of us know they have nuclear weapons. Maybe we should get into where does international law stand on the US and the UK being partners with a country who's not in the non-proliferation treaty, who has nuclear weapons. Maybe we could have a whole conversation on that next time, Peirs.
I think,
But come
you know
on,
what?
we all
Will
know
you
what the
allow
truth
me
is
to
here.
answer
I've
the
actually
issue?
asked Netanyahu myself that very question, and he didn't answer. So yeah, I think it'd be a very interesting topic for debate. We've got to leave it there. Dave Smith, Natasha Hausdorff, thank you both very much.